What's going on, everybody? John Stamper here with ADOM TV, and so excited to be coming back to you, ADOM Nation, here on these Wednesday live casts right on the ADOM Facebook page. And as we continue to bring you those, we're very, very excited for our guest today. We got Alex Ratinsky, who is the SEO manager from Roadside Dental Marketing. How are you doing, Alex?
Doing great, John. Really appreciate being here.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you. And before we get started, I know you're going to talk a lot today about Google and Google rankings and everything in regards to SEO. And I think what's great about the content that you're going to share today, I know we were going over this before we got started, is how relevant it is to where we are right now, right? With a lot of practices of trying to find ways to be able to not only bring in more new patients, but manage through a lot of the challenges they've had to manage through. And you're going to cover a lot of great content today. So what you and I are going to do is we're going to do some back and forth. You've provided some great questions that I'm going to, go over with you and have you share that. Before we get started, would love to have you share with everybody a little bit about your story and your Roadside dental marketing journey and all that stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again. And I really appreciate being here with the ADOM community and just being able to provide some of this information. A little bit about me. Again, my name is Alex Ratinsky. I've been with Roadside Dental Marketing for about 6 or 7 years. Primarily working in the SEO field, in the SEO space. Really dug into that and have enjoyed that for a long time, specifically in the dental and healthcare industry. So when it comes to all things SEO, working in the day-to-day, actually working on client accounts, that's usually me, or at some point I probably worked on your site. If you're with Roadside or if you've ever had an audit or something like that, I probably looked it over at some point. So it's been really fun and an enjoyable experience. And one of the reasons that I'm here to just kind of talk about a little bit about Google Maps specifically is, especially when we look at where things are going right now, just how many searches there are done on Google on even a daily basis. Google has almost about 3.5 billion searches a day, and almost half of all of the searches on Google are localized. Which means that those are people looking for some sort of local business, local product, something that's relevant to a proximity of where they're at. And dental practices obviously fit into that category. So it's really important for practices to understand how they can actually leverage Google Maps, Google organic search, just to kind of improve their rankings within not just Google, but all search engines, but Google being the predominant one, being most popular. And just another quick stat. One study found that nearly 70% of all smartphone users say that they use Google Maps most frequently. And according to Google, 83% of US people who visited a store or a business said that they used online search before going in. So that just gives us a good understanding of just how much search is utilized and just how important Google is to a dental practice today.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And one of the first things I wanted to ask you today that you can share with everybody, and it's real relevant to the times that we're in, is we know that there's a lot of practices out there, Alex, that are coming out of being closed and shut down. They're concerned about their rankings and what impact that has had on their business, and more importantly, people finding them locally, as you mentioned, which is so important.
Yeah, and there's, I'll start by saying this too. There are two different kinds of Google results. There's something called the local map pack and the organic local ranking or organic ranking. So those are actually two separate things, and we can talk about that a little bit later too. But today we're going to be focusing a little bit more on local map pack, which has to do with Google My Business, Google Maps, and how all that kind of works together. And there are things that kind of overlap. A lot of those signals are important for both organic and local, but we're going to talk a little bit about both of those. So one of the first things, and when we're talking about local map pack rankings, one of the most important signals in Google's eyes is actually online reviews, especially on your Google My Business profile. Google tends to take and aggregate all of the reviews from all of your sources, whether it be Yelp or Facebook or some other citation or directory. But Google obviously prefers the information that's stored within their own products. So reviews on Google My Business is a really important ranking factor. And actually, when we get a little bit more granular, into how those reviews affect rankings. It's whether a review has text along with it, rather than just a 1 to 5 star. The words chosen to write the review, the overall star rating given to the business, the consistency of reviews, how often a practice is getting those reviews, what are the quality of them, what are people actually saying, and just the overall review sentiment. And so that's just, and when we talk about just reviews alone, we start to get a little bit more specific, and we can see how it just keeps breaking down and breaking down. And it makes sense, because when we think about what Google is trying to do, it has a really big job trying to house the world's information and put all this together. And so when we're looking at Google Maps specifically, it's going to be using a lot of that user-generated content and referring to reviews to kind of get a good standing on how a dental practice sizes up to its competition, and making sure that it can provide the most relevant result available. And one of the next things after reviews is links. One of the Google's largest ranking factors, again, is links. And this isn't links to a Google My Business profile. This is actually links to a website. And there's a lot of different ways that people can build links. It's very difficult at times to kind of get started on that, especially when you have no basis. But writing articles, blogging on a regular basis, content marketing, and then promoting those articles. It's a really great way to build links, especially when you provide value for not only your patients, but just for the community as a whole. We have a lot of really knowledgeable and resourceful people within the ADOM community, a lot of really talented dental office managers, dentists themselves, that have a lot of value and insights to provide, whether that be for writing for other publications or other articles and then referencing back to their website, or publishing it on their website themselves and kind of promoting that and getting those links that way. Also searching for mentions online and requesting that they link back to the site is really powerful. A lot of these dentists are being referenced, or they're doing different events, or they have been published somewhere. And a lot of times the person who has published that doesn't necessarily link back to the website when they're writing about the person. So it's a really easy way to just kind of do some of those searches, see what has been written, what has been published, what is my local practice actually doing, and how can we get some of those publications or websites to link back to our website. Because when we think about Google, it's essentially one giant popularity contest. And Google's foundation of how Google actually crawls and indexes all of the world's content is backed by links. So every time it sees a link, it jumps to the next page, and to the next page, and to the next page, until eventually it's crawled the entire website, the entire online world. So it's kind of fascinating how that all works. So links have and always traditionally have always been a really, really important ranking factor. But they're also hard to get, and there's a lot of little nuances and rules within that. But offering testimonials to business partners in exchange for a link is another great way. People love to show video testimonials, or if you use specific products or service providers or anything like that, reaching out to your reps and asking if would it be okay if we left a review, testimonial or video review for your website. And then if they do that, you can request that they just link back to your site so that people can find you, so they know who you are in relation to them. Yeah, perhaps even co-referencing or co-linking to referring practices. This works really great with specialists. And if you're an orthodontist referring to a general practice, this is a great, you guys are already referring to each other. It's a great opportunity there, whether it be surgeons, or there's a lot of opportunities for linking, as well as press coverage, and running events. You know, a lot of these practices do a lot of special things, especially right now when we think about COVID and some of the things that dental practices have had to be a little bit more creative. They've done a lot of things for their communities. We know what's going on in the world, and different practices have done a variety of different things. And there's a lot of opportunities to use those events and all that work that's being done behind the scenes, and try to get some coverage around that. And not only is that just going to help just general marketing as a whole, but it is actually going to help search engine optimization, because again, those links, when we get those links, it helps Google understand this is what this dental practice has been doing. They're really helping their community. A lot of these local entities within that community are linking back to them. And this just tells Google, hey, this dental practice is becoming more and more and more important. Maybe we should actually give them a bump up and make them a more relevant result in their area. And then last but not least, which is actually an interesting one, is Google My Business is not perfect. You think about how much information Google has to try to store and to analyze. And so unfortunately, there are plenty of people who are using Google My Business in a very spammy way. So Google My Business spam is unfortunately a real thing. It's something that a lot of me as an SEO fight all the time because Google has very specific guidelines for what they allow and what they don't allow in terms of rules for your Google My Business profile, which we'll get into a little bit later as well. But things like Google My Business actually has guidelines for what you are and aren't allowed to use as your title, how you're supposed to set up your categories, all these different little things. And so when you see people who, instead of using their practice name, might use something like dentist in Seattle and then their practice name, they're kind of spamming that keyword in there. And it is giving them a slight ranking boost at first, but it also puts them at risk of suspending their Google My Business profile altogether, which is really a bad thing. And we really don't want to do something that could potentially cause a practice to lose patients for any extended period of time. So one of the things that you can do when you are following the rules is look for those opportunities of who's trying to scam the system a little bit, and just reporting that to Google and saying, hey, this name needs to be changed. There's two different ways to do it. You can actually make an edit suggestion, and that goes straight to Google. And there's also a Google My Business redressal form altogether that you can fill out that talks about if they're a fake listing. Like if you know this isn't actually a practice, nobody is located here. You can have any sort of little bit of proof to that. Google takes that and they'll be able to remove those listings. So it's also interesting that just removing that spam, you don't necessarily have to do anything to increase your rankings. If you take off the almost cheating competitors, all of a sudden your rankings go up in the Google Maps section. Yeah. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and it's really kind of a fun thing to kind of get into and talk about.
Well, I have to tell you, hearing you share all that certainly solidifies why somebody would need your help, right? Because like you said, all of that is super important, while at the same time, it can be overwhelming. But like you mentioned, if you do break it down into those little pieces, there really is a roadmap, I guess you could say, in regards to how a practice can do that. So I know one of the things you mentioned at the beginning that you wanted to share was explaining the difference between like local search and the organic search results. So if you could get into some details around those two.
Yeah. And local search, when I say local search, I'm referring to local map pack rankings. And so if you were to search for, pick any local small business, or just search a dental practice, for example, if you do dentist in New York City, one of the first things you're going to see is that little map section at the top of the search engine results page. And then you're going to see 3 listings underneath that. It changed. It used to be 5, it used to be 7, and now for the last good amount of time, it's just been 3. And out of those 3, that's pulling from Google My Business profile and Google Maps. And those results are at the top of the search engine results page. So it tells us that it's one of the first things people are going to see. So it's pretty valuable. But it actually has an entirely different algorithm than the blue links underneath it that are just kind of the standard web results that we're all used to. And so utilizing those 2 different algorithms, kind of understanding what things play into each, is pretty important. And so for the local map pack rankings, one of the most important factors to that is the Google My Business profile. And Google My Business houses all the information about your practice, whether it be your business name, your address, your phone number, the website, some specific categories, photos, reviews. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And then the organic result is pretty much focused entirely on your website, not taking into account your Google My Business profile at all. So some of the top Google Map ranking factors, and there's a study that, and I think Whitney from Roadside is in the comments here today, and maybe she can reference this. There was an article that I wrote for a well-known SEO software in Seattle area. And they actually publish every year the top Google Map rankings factors. Google doesn't release this information, obviously. So it's kind of aggregated from a general acceptance of all the well-respected people in the SEO industry. They kind of compile that into what does everyone kind of agree that are the most important factors based off of a lot of testing, a lot of studies, and just generally working with clients on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of us kind of agree that the most important ones, a good section of that is Google My Business signals. That then includes categories. If there are any keywords in your business title, again, not in a way that violates Google's guidelines, but a lot of us have practice names that are actually would be considered a keyword themselves. If you have the location in your practice name, for example, that might actually help you inadvertently, whether you plan that or not. Whether they're in your descriptions, reviews again. And then one of the biggest things with Google Maps is it's working based off of proximity, which is interesting because a lot of people kind of want to ask, okay, well, I'm located in this town, but how can I start ranking in the Google Maps section 3 towns over? Because we really want to grow outside of our local area a little bit more. And the short answer is it's very hard because, again, Google wants to provide the most relevant result to their searchers. And more often than not, that's the person who's closest to them with whatever those other signals look like. So the only way to do that is to be a more quality result in all other aspects than some of their local competitors. So if if 3 towns over, you have 2 or 3 dental practices that have really bad reviews, they don't have an up-to-date website, they're not filled out their Google My Business profile, all these different things, and then you have a good opportunity of kind of expanding that search because Google understands, well, maybe this practice is a better result than these 3 because all these signals are telling us that people really enjoy and appreciate this practice, and we want to make sure that we present the most quality results to those who are searching for it. And that's how Google makes their money. It's how Google functions. At the end of the day, they want to provide the best result. And so there's one thing that you take away from this. Every practice is trying to be the best practice that they absolutely can. And so just working everything that you're doing internally, just express that online. Make sure to fill out all of your Google My Business profile. Make sure that you're representing all of the exciting, fun things that you're doing internally on your website, because that's going to help with online search. And it's really just a good digital marketing best practice. We talked about links a little bit earlier and review signals. There's also a lot of on-page signals that help with the local ranking algorithm. And when I talk about on-page, again, I'm talking about your website. So there's a lot of back-end things like setting your title tags, which are actually what those words are in the blue links in your search engine results page, making sure that those actually make sense. Sometimes the default, you can actually see it in your browser tab. If you go to your website and look at the little browser, you can see whatever your title tag is if you look at the little tab at the top. And sometimes the default just says home-dental practice. But if you're trying to rank for dentist in Chicago, that's not a very good title tag because when somebody's searching and they see home-dental practice, or whatever the practice name is, they're not really going to think that's a relevant result for them. They don't know where you're located. They don't know what you do. So making sure that all of those things are set and optimized are going to be really beneficial. And it just kind of gives Google all of this information to say, this is why we are extremely confident in this website or this dental practice as the best result for these search terms.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned a couple things there that I think are so relevant. And that is that as people build, I guess what you could say, Alex, is your Google map, right? Which is like who you are online. And it's a whole nother dimension, right, that a practice has to think about. It's like they were going about their day, going about their week, doing what they did to market their practice, do well for their patients. And it really is a whole other level, right, of what they need to do to make sure, online that they have that same type of discipline and attention, that they're paying attention to that. And you mentioned a lot about Google My Business. Could you elaborate a little bit more about what that is? I think a lot of times people just hear Google and they're not maybe super familiar with Google My Business. So if you could get into a little bit of details on that and then talk about, is it important or not? I mean, I have a feeling that it's important because we're going to talk about it, but maybe how important it is in regards to them marketing what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'll try to slow down a little bit too, because I know I get excited about SEO, and sometimes I could just start talking about things that when you're not in it, it may not be come as quickly, hopefully. But when we think about just Google My Business, what I'm referring to as well is there's a lot of online directories. For example, there's Yelp, there's Squarespace, Foursquare, or excuse me, not Squarespace. There's Foursquare, there's Facebook, actually counts as a directory. And Google My Business is technically also a directory. It's not just a directory, though. The way Google works is Google's whole job is to try to house all of the world's information and present it in the most logical and simplistic way, and whatever the best result is. And so Google creates, they call this internally just an entity, which is essentially just a thing for everything in the world. So John, you are an entity, I'm an entity, ADOM as an organization is an entity, each city, state, location, building, everything. And Google tries to take all of these little pieces and understand how they all fit together. So that's a lot of work for Google to do. And Google is very, very smart. They have a lot of really high-paid, very intelligent engineers working for them. But Google isn't perfect. And so everything that we can do to tell them exactly what the correct information is about our business, about our website, and present it in a logical way is only going to bring about better results for them in terms of ranking. Because it's actually all part of Google's knowledge graph. So like I said, Whitney is in the comments, and we actually have, there's a download that everyone can use from Roadside about how to set up your Google My Business profile, just to make sure that all of these things are done, make sure it's set up correctly and that it's verified. But if you go to google.com/business, if you don't already have a GMB profile, that's where you can start one. If you do already have one, that's where you can manage it and make sure that everything's looking correctly. And then just going through it and making sure that your business name is accurate and up to date, because they can be, unfortunately, they can be not edited, but they can be suggested edited by other people. And Google doesn't necessarily alert you to that. So things can sometimes change. The categories are set up correctly. If you specialize in cosmetic dentistry, making sure that that's present. Google has 4 or 5 different categories to dentists, to the dental industry specifically. So making sure that we're choosing the primary category is the most important and relevant category. So if you're a general practitioner, dentist is going to be the main one. If you're a cosmetic dentist, primarily, that needs to be the focus. And so there's just making sure that your categories are set up properly. And then photos. If you have photos of the outside of your building, of the inside of your practice, a lot of dental offices do really quality photo shoots, but they don't always put that in their Google My Business profile. And it's one of the first interactions that people are going to have with your practice. So why not give them the best possible first introduction there, and make sure that those quality photos are added to your Google My Business profile, so that as they're considering different practices, they're new to the area, they're looking for a new dentist, they can click on those photos and say, "Oh, I'm really connecting with these team members, or this smiling dentist who's making me feel warm and safe already before I even enter the practice. And I like the environment, and I like how it looks," and making sure that all of that money that was spent on a photo shoot is put into your Google My Business profile. And it's also just a good way to get a good pulse for office managers on just public reception. How do my reviews look as a whole? How many reviews do we have in comparison to some of our competitors? Are they not just in number, but just in quality? Actually read the comments and make sure that we respond to them, which we'll get to a little bit later as well. But hopefully that answers the question. What is Google My Business? It's part of Google's knowledge graph, but in short, it's a form of a directory where Google can easily present different businesses so that people can find them on Google Maps.
So speaking of Google Maps, I think that's a good segue because that's another big important piece that I know that you spoke about in the beginning. And would love to have you share a little bit about that and what a practice can do to make sure that they're optimizing uh, Google Maps, right? Like really using it for what it was built to use, especially like you mentioned, Alex. What I think is very interesting is there's the organic search that so many people do to look up an athlete or a celebrity or whatever the case may be. And then there's really this local search function of Google that applies exactly to what you're talking about today for dental practice, wanting to make sure that patients can find them, whether it be new patients, referrals, what have you. So if you could touch on just a little bit about Google Maps and some of the things that a practice could do to really optimize that.
Yeah. And as I've kind of mentioned a little bit, a lot of those things that Google takes into as a ranking factor, there is some overlap. So some of the things that are important for organic search are also important for Google Maps and for the local rankings there. And just to clarify as well, Google Maps, I mean, there's a lot of little Google related terms. There's Google Maps, there's Google My Business, there's Google Analytics, there's Google, like it's overwhelming how much Google has taken over the world. But Google Maps and Google My Business are part of the same thing. So there is no separate way that you need to set up something specifically for Google Maps, whether they're using the app on their phone, whether they're using the maps.com, maps.google.com in their browser, or whether they're just searching and clicking on the result. It's all tied into the same thing. And so Google My Business profile is really what needs to be set up and optimized because people are using Google Maps in a variety of different ways. Like as mentioned, some of them search on Maps directly. Some people, actually, I'm surprised more and more. I primarily have always used Google Maps just to find specific directions when I'm looking for a place. But the more and more surveys show that lots and lots of people start with Google Maps. They open up the app on their phone, and that's actually how they search for a variety of different places near them, whether it be for restaurants, whether it be for dental practices, whether it be a specific product. Instead of going to Google in a browser, they actually open up their maps altogether. And if they're starting in the map section, if you don't have a Google My Business profile, they're not going to find you because that's separate from your website and organic results. So that's why Google My Business is really important for rankings because otherwise you're missing out on nearly half of all the search results that could be going to your practice. And when we think about by cutting that potential of new patients in half, that's not really something that we want to be doing, especially when we're trying to grow a thriving practice. So it only takes a few minutes to set up. Getting verified might take a couple days. The way Google does that is after you set up your information, you make sure you provide your accurate business address. And to prove that you actually are located there and that Google can verify that, they send a postcard with a Google verification code through snail mail. So it takes a couple days, and then you just enter that code into your Google My Business profile, and it's verified. And that's the process for setting one up from scratch. And again, it's all on that download there. If you check it out. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to any member of the Roadside team. You can reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to walk you guys through some of that as well. But it's just a great place to store all of that information. But it definitely does affect our rankings in both sections of organic and the local map rankings results.
So I've got a couple more questions I want to ask you, just a couple more points before we get there. Hearing all of these different things that a practice has to do, right, in regards to making sure that they're optimizing their position, their ranking on Google, I am sure that you have some great stories with some clients that you guys have worked with that are doing this very, very well. And if you could, Alex, I don't know if you maybe have them off the top of your head, but it really is cool to me to hear some actual life stories. I don't know, sometimes people realize the impact of all the things that you're talking about, that when you do them, when you stay disciplined to them, and you really do, you update your Google My Business profile, you're doing everything that you possibly can, you're all the linkage, a lot of those things really can provide some great results. Can you share maybe just one or two examples of some practices you guys have worked with that have done this well and really, really is helping them in regards to being discovered, I guess you could say?
Yeah. And there's, like I said, I've had the privilege to work on a lot of different dental practice accounts, being able to work within their websites, doing a lot of different things. So I've definitely seen a ton of improvements and results in that way. And just off of the top of my head, I won't mention the practice name, but there's one specifically in Seattle that we redid their website for them. And as soon as we rebuilt their website alone, just that improvement in terms of design and user experience and functionality, we saw almost a 50% growth in organic traffic, and also just rankings. From there, we dialed in a lot of the search related things. We had them blogging on a regular basis. We built some links to their site, and it wasn't. We can't take credit for all of this. They definitely were doing a lot of things internally, and they're a multi-practitioner practice. But they were getting up to over 90 new patients a month, which was really fantastic for them and really exciting to see. With just how many patients they were able to get, and they were doing a lot of other things as well. Like I said, we can't take all credit, but when we look at just the analytics side of it, we see all that traffic going up, and we see their rankings improving. It was really exciting, and it was one of those things that we get to kind of celebrate all together, especially such a big number like that. So it's been really fun and exciting. I forgot to mention one thing when we are setting up. I'll give a little unique tactic or a special strategy. If this only kind of applies in some situations, but if you are a multi-practitioner dental office, especially if you offer more than just one specific type of service. So if you're a dental practice that also offers different services fitting into the cosmetic dental category, you're allowed to have a separate Google My Business profile for each individual practitioner, which allows a little bit more visibility online. So some people think that they're only allowed one Google My Business profile. And if you have one business or one office with one dentist, then yes, you only get one. You don't get one for the business and one for the dentist because Google wants the reviews to all be the same thing. And it makes sense if you think from Google's perspective. If you have 2 or 3 dentists or practitioners in the same office, they're not all being reviewed and they're not all doing the same quality of work. So a bad review for one dentist, for example, one practitioner, wouldn't necessarily apply to the other ones. And so Google wants to make sure that there is a way to separate that so that if one ever leaves or something changes, Google can make sure that follows the right practitioner and the right reputation. So in terms of setup, though, if you have multi-practitioners, choosing a different primary category for each one can sometimes see a little boost in that specific subsection. So if you already have a primary business, Google My Business profile for, let's say, John Smith Dental, John Smith DDS, and then we also have another separate practitioner listing. If we set the first one up as a general dentist and the second one up as a cosmetic dentist, you get to start to see some improvements for those 2 specific search terms. And each one kind of targets different areas of online search, which is kind of a unique setup, and it's kind of fun. I think a lot of people just kind of match everything along the same way, but making sure that you actually only set it up if you actually offer those services. But just thought I'd mention that because it's a little bit of a unique setup that tends to get a little bit better results.
Excellent. All right. So we have a couple questions coming in, which is exciting. So I want to make sure I get to those. One of the last things that I know you wanted to talk about today, Alex, is you've touched on a lot of this work that a practice does to be discovered. Then you have the whole element of, okay, patients are there. You shared the example of the practice that's crushing it, getting new patients. Then you have the whole piece of reviews and what that means, right? Actually working with the patients, having them come in. Hopefully your team is doing an amazing job and the patients want to give you great reviews. But if you could go ahead and touch on that a little bit and that whole side of Google, like you said, you've touched on everything that is Google connected, My Business, Google Maps, Google Reviews is another one of those big pieces that I know you wanted to share some insight on today.
Yeah, and reviews, again, are so important. But the question we get a lot is how do I actually go about getting reviews? Because, I know reviews are important, but no one is just naturally leaving reviews all the time. Unfortunately, the only time that people tend to leave reviews are when something really drastic happens, and it's usually more on the negative side of things. If you think about when the last time we've left a review, we tend to leave a little bit more reviews when things go negative than just for positive. But what I remind practices all the time, and dental office managers as a whole, is the power of just asking your patients for a review goes a long way. And training and reminding our team internally, especially after an exciting moment, we think about what we do as, well, I shouldn't say we, I don't personally, but what dental practices do for the community and just for people's health and for their happiness. They have such a drastic impact on people's lives, and it's such an enjoyable thing. And we see hear about these stories and these moments when someone does some transformative service for them within the realm of dentistry, and people are crying afterwards. They're so happy and it just expressing all that emotion. And I'm not saying they need to go be gushing on your Google My Business profile, but we have these interactions all the time. So we know that we create plenty of positive interactions with our patients. So just reminding our team just afterwards, after the appointment is done, just say, hey, would you mind leaving us a review on Google My Business or finding us on Google? And then implementing that into actual processes. There are a lot of online reputation tools that you can use. There are also just setting up follow-up emails with a link to the Google My Business review. A lot of practices have post-op emails that go out. Just adding a link in that to leave a review if you had a good experience. And setting up a desk display. Every time that they come in and interact, they'll be able to see, don't forget to leave us a review. These are just a lot of little things that people can do that actually make a big impact down the line. Because you're not going to get 500 reviews all in the first week. It's going to be gradual, and that's okay. That's exactly what Google wants. Actually, if you had too many reviews all at once, Google might actually think that that's all fake. It might actually be a bad problem. So doing it in a natural and organic way is really what's going to help practices when it comes to reviews. And it's so important, and it doesn't have to be overly complicated. Just setting up a couple systems and doing some training that says, hey, let's remember to ask our patients for reviews, especially when they're happy and excited and had such a great visit with us.
Okay. So we've got some great questions, as I suspected, because this is just very, very rich in content, what you've shared today. I do have to say, Alex, before I go to the questions, doing this without a PowerPoint, man, pretty impressive, right? I mean, you're just kind of rattling stuff out of your head, which is pretty awesome. You certainly know your content, which is great. All right. So the first question is, how do I know if my website needs more optimization and local maintenance?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And the short answer that I would give you is you could ask Roadside to do a free audit for you, and we'll just tell you straight up. We'll say, here's the results. If you want to do it yourself, usually you tend to have to kind of pay for some sort of SEO tool in order to get these readings. But I will give you just 3 or 5 things that you can do for free, just to double check that everything's looking well. And then from there, you can perhaps just consult a professional just for a quick audit or a review. Just say, hey, how does this look? I just want to get a baseline to see how we're doing, what needs to be improved. Doesn't mean you have to go pay someone to do anything right away. It gives you a good amount of information to start with. But again, if you look at your title tags, and what that is like I said, if you search your website, and it's different for every single page, just go through each page of your website and just look at the little tab bar. And if you hover over that tab in your window, in your browser window, you'll see what the full title tag is, what that description, or not the description, but the tag is that's itself. So, for example, the homepage should probably have whatever the focus keyword is. So if you go to your website and it says home - Seattle Dental Practice, instead of, like if that's your practice name, instead of location or dentist in location, or some sort of variation, whatever your target is. So if you're a pediatric dentist, you want to say pediatric dentist in Baltimore, for example, and then dash perhaps your brand name. But a lot of them aren't set up. They're just not even optimized. And the next thing you can do is making sure that whatever that page targets has the keyword somewhere in the heading or within the content itself. Not in a spammy way. We want to be right for our patients and we always put them first. Google is very against just trying to manipulate their system. But at the same time, we want to write things in a way that lets people know where they're at. Is your address in the footer of your website? Can people clearly see what your business hours are, how to contact you, your phone number? All of these things Google looks at in terms of a website. And actually, starting pretty soon, here in the next few months, Google is adding a whole new set of ranking factors that are all about a website's user experience. And that's going to be a pretty important factor coming up pretty soon. So how fast does your website load? Is it mobile friendly? Is it easy to navigate? Is it kind of jarring when it tries to load, so that when someone goes to click on something, the button moves 3 inches and they end up clicking on the wrong thing? Are there too many pop-ups and advertisements or things like that that are distracting patients or pulling them away? So really kind of consolidating those things and making sure that we present a clean, cohesive, simplistic web experience is going to be really beneficial. And then all the things that I mentioned for Google My Business, just making sure those categories and everything's just filled out. I know I've talked a lot about it, and perhaps it seems a little overwhelming, but if you actually go through just your Google My Business profile, you'll see that it's not too overwhelming just to set it up. It walks you through it pretty simply, just making sure that all the little sections that are relevant to your practice are filled out properly, and that's going to put you miles ahead of most competitors who tend to ignore it or forget about it or not even realize that it's important.
All right. I have a really good detailed question coming in here, so this is going to be good. So we are a 1.5-year-old practice, have 90 plus 5-star reviews on Google, new website linked, Google My Business site that we regularly add posts to, active Facebook page, a business page, a newer dental clinic opened since December 2019, ranks in the top 3, 2 other dental businesses with antiquated websites, and less than 9 Google reviews complete the top 3 on Maps. How is this, and what can we do to bump them?
Yeah. So the short answer is keep doing the things you're doing, because obviously it sounds like you're doing a lot of really great things. I'd have someone just do a quick audit or review of your site to make sure that things are aligned, but I'm going to assume that you guys have already done that or that you're on the right track. The other thing I would just double check is, where are you searching from when you're checking these things? Because what's interesting is, again, Google Maps, so much of it is based off proximity, and it's actually like specific, like latitude, longitude, specific locations. And there's a lot of tools that you can actually track rankings within just like a geographic grid. And you'll see that the results differ pretty drastically within even a mile or 2 radius. And it's pretty fascinating to see why on earth is all of this happening. And it's because it's proximity. So if you are searching physically closer to those practices, that actually might be skewing your results a little bit. And again, just providing a more relevant result through reviews. And honestly, probably the more important one, because it's a little bit harder, is links. And I'll talk a little bit more about links. I would focus for your practice probably on improving your link profile. That tends to be the most common issue there. People just assume that all links are good, and that's actually not the case. There's a lot of links that are actually bad, especially if they're coming from sites that Google wouldn't want to be associating with your site. But any type of relevant quality site, sites that are relevant to the dental community, sites that you regularly use, sites that you would trust. If you're able to write content for them or do any sort of sponsorship or promotion, or any way that you're able to tend to help Google understand your connection to those other organizations, is really going to help in your rankings in that way as well.
All right. So I'm sure you hear this next one a lot, which is the website is fairly stagnant, but they have a very, very active Facebook page, simply because, as you know, there's a lot of things you can put on Facebook on a daily basis to make that more active, but website, not always that opportunity. Is that going to hurt somebody with their practice as far as, not updating their website as much as they'd like to?
And there are definitely times when not updating a website could affect rankings in a negative way. But that's more important when the information is just flat out wrong. So if you've moved and you don't update that, yeah, that's probably not the best result that you're giving to potential patients there. So making sure that overall, as a relevant sense, that your website is up to date in terms of your name, your address, your phone number, important contact information. That all seems pretty common sense, but people tend to forget it just because life gets busy. We know how busy you office managers are, and so we can't expect you guys to do everything. But yeah, just maybe setting up an audit every once in a while, every couple months, just to go through your site, make sure your Google My Business profile. Honestly, it probably would only take 5 or 10 minutes just to do a quick checklist. And Whitney can actually there's a link to a spreadsheet that I made a while back for Google My Business optimization, just SEO checklist, just to kind of make sure it's all pass fail. You can mark it yourself and just say, hey, are these things all set up correctly? Is this making sense? Is this working? So checking those things. But in general, when we think of online search, social does have a part of it. It's not the most important ranking factor by any means. It's one of the smaller ones, but If you have a vibrant community online, especially in a Facebook setting, utilize that. Create really powerful pieces of content on your website. Start blogging and promoting that within your Facebook community and sharing and engaging with that content. So if you use Facebook as the area where you can engage within your website, you craft these beautiful experiences on your site, and then you use Facebook to kind of continue those conversations and kind of marry those two online presences together.
Yeah, excellent. And I was thinking about the website question, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this. Is that there are a lot of things that people can do on their website, especially a dental practice, whether it be I don't know if you guys see this a lot, like adding some sort of like image gallery, right? I know a lot of practices like to continue to put up new pictures of like work they've done for their patients, like before and afters. I know I've heard have worked really well. Not only that, but then also if they have somebody in their practice that's active as a blogger, right, that might be putting something up on a weekly basis to add just some sort of dynamic piece to their website. So like you said, it's not just the information about them. So curious on your thoughts on that. Might just be a couple of ideas of maybe what they could do on the website to kind of keep that, moving along as well.
Yeah, and I'll share a little bit here. That's a great question. A little bit here about specific ideas regarding to content on the website. So we see a lot, and some people just still do this, and it's okay. It's not a bad thing, but people will create just pages dedicated to just a smile gallery, or a page dedicated to just testimonials that they list out. And although those pages are fine in and of themselves, because they obviously will get checked out occasionally, as a whole, dentists tend to like smile galleries, but patients don't necessarily just want to look at a bunch of pictures of people's teeth unless it's relevant to whatever service they're doing, so that they can kind of mentally prepare themselves. So that's not usually a page that is ever viewed that often. So a much better approach is to add sections of before and afters or results that are just specific to that service page. So if you have a page talking about dental implants, and you have a couple before and after like photo galleries, adding it to the page on dental implants instead of just having a page dedicated to all of your before and afters of everything, whether it be teeth whitening or cosmetic services or implants or what have you. Creating those that are relevant to that page is not only better for Google, but it actually just makes a better user experience for your patients. And just kind of thinking of how we can organize content on the page that makes sense. So on a page about your service, make sure that you're listing all the benefits. Why should people choose you over your competitors? What kind of insurance providers do you accept? Again, before and afters. If there are testimonials that are specific to those services, add those testimonials on that page alone. You don't necessarily need a page that just lists why everyone thinks we're great, because patients tend to think that they can just look that up online themselves rather than just believing whatever's on the website. But when you add very specific testimonials to a specific service, that's a lot different, because that acts as a little bit more specific, and it doesn't come across as fake in any way. It comes across as very relevant to whatever you're talking about. So when we think of content, just thinking about whatever we can do to make this page or write this content structure in a way that makes patients easily understand what it is that they're going to get and why that they should choose you over somebody else for this specific purpose. If you did that on every single page, you would drastically stand out in terms of content than so many other people and other practices, I should say. And even websites that aren't dentists. I think a lot of people could benefit from just structuring their content in a logical and effective way.
I love it. Keeping it simple and clean and organized, like your workspace, like your house, right? Goes a long way. Well, Alex, this has been amazing. Again, I think first off, your knowledge of this space. I know this is what you do on a daily basis for Roadside, as well as for all of your clients. Super information to help people. Again, I think this is one of those things that is always evolving. I know you mentioned just a little while ago that Google is getting ready to change some things even more so. as we go forward. So wanted to thank you so much for your time today. I know everybody out there watching on the ADOM Facebook page really appreciates you and Roadside Dental Marketing. Could you go ahead and just let everybody know where's a great place to find out more about you guys? I know, like you mentioned, Whitney's been putting some great resources right in the comment threads, everybody. So make sure that you go ahead and you click on those in reference to a lot of the information that Alex shared. But how can more people learn about Roadside Dental Marketing?
Yeah, so roadsidedentalmarketing.com. You can give us a call. There's a lot of forms throughout the site that you can do for specific services. I think we're offering different free website audits, as well as there's some downloads and really beneficial resources that Whitney's been putting in the comments here. And if not, feel free to just reach out to anybody. We tend to be pretty helpful as much as we possibly can. We're really passionate about the dental community because actually a lot of our employees were actually working in the office themselves for a good period of time. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Roadside, but that's one of the things that makes us unique, is that a lot of us have experience as actual office managers themselves, and then have transitioned to online marketing. I come from, as you can tell, a little bit more technical SEO background, but still we have a really good internal just kind of conversations always about how can we create the best possible resources for dental practices around us. So yeah, feel free to reach out, roadsidedentalmarketing.com, and we'll help you out in absolutely any way that we can.
Awesome. Well, Alex, thanks again. For everybody that watched today, thank you so much. Be sure to share this out to a lot of your other office manager colleagues. Such great information. And we're going to continue to bring a lot of these great live casts right here on the ADOM Facebook page. So many great people out there providing great information for you, the dental manager. So Alex, thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.